This is going to be a 3-part series packaged into one video. I'm remastering a video I worked on 2 years ago. It's relevant now since a big part of what started that theory has been proven correct in recent chapters. In between each part will be an intermission that will contain bits of the secret ending for each video. A secret ending is when I finish the theory and just start talking freely about topics. I will also add in extra info. Enjoy this full and completed theory. Cursed swords were introduced nearly 2 decades ago, but we still don't know 2 major things about them. How were they created and what's their true power? In this video we will be speculating the origin. So far the only clue we have is that black blades are made from a swordsman's haki. That's useful information, but it doesn't close this case, because black blades aren't said to be cursed as far as we know. I wouldn't be surprised if they were confirmed as some type of curse, but it's not enough to speculate. Because Enma and the Katetsu blades aren't black, yet they are cursed. However, it's a step in the right direction, because while I don't believe it's the swordsman's haki that curses the blade, I do think that is the swordsmith's haki that curses the blade. In fact, it's not a curse but rather a test of worthiness. First, it shouldn't be too shocking that the curse is related to haki. Haki can translate to spirit, or as willpower, and many other similar words. When Zoro first used Shisui, he commented on how heavy it is, and how he'd need to get used to wielding a blade of its material. We now know it wasn't just a material, but rather haki itself. May the struggle have been Ryuma's will wanting a swordsman skilled enough to wield such a blade? Possible. I mean, it does match up with what a swordsman would expect of another who wields their blade. However, Katetsu and Enma haven't been said to be exceptionally heavy, most likely because it isn't imbued with armament haki. I'm more inclined to believe that it's Conqueror's haki, which is invisible, so that explains why cursed blades don't have a change in color. Those who use Conqueror's haki are usually people who strive to be the very best at something. Someone that wants to be the best blacksmith would want the best warrior to wield their blade. Most swordsmen do not care about the intent of the one using the blade. Tashigi is a rare exception. However, the blacksmiths care more deeply for their weapons more than anyone else. They want to know that its wielder can honor the sword. When Zoro proved himself to the Sandai Katetsu, it wasn't his swordsmanship being put to the test, but rather his conviction. My last piece of evidence is what we learned from a swordsmith in the story. Hitetsu tells Zoro that he is compatible with Enma due to his possible connection to its swordsmith. With all that said, that just about covers why I believe cursed swords exist. In part 2, I will go over what I believe is the true potential of the cursed sword's power. I hope you enjoyed part 1. What I'm going to show you next is a theory I made months after my cursed sword theory. It is a different multi-part theory that I call understanding haki, also known as the chakra haki theory. This is because I show many correlations between the 7 chakras and haki. The first video covers why haki is a vibrational energy known as chi. In the second video I explain that energy can vibrate at certain frequencies to result in chakras. The clip we're about to watch now is from part 3, in which I go over how Conqueror's haki correlates to what is known as the crown chakra. It's cut down to show just what matters to the cursed blade theory. Thus, should you watch the full video, make sure you don't skip this as there's important details you could miss. This clip is relevant to this theory because I give an actual explanation as to why it would make sense for Conqueror's haki to give cursed blades, or any named blade, a will of their own. Remember when I said third eye deals with the mind? It might lead you to believe that chakra is centered in the brain, but it is between the eyebrows. It is the crown chakra that is located in the brain, in the physical sense, but in the spiritual sense, it's sort of on top of your head, you know, like an actual crown or a halo. However, calling it the mind would be underselling it. It's more like your reality. It is everything that you've been building up to through all the chakras. The associating element is thought, the most powerful of all elements. What is a voice without a thought? With all that said, let's read the highest frequency of chi. and see if it relates to Haki. Spirituality as divine light. At this level, Chi energetically manifests through subtle vibrations which contain messages, i.e., thoughts and feelings resonating within specific objects' energetic field. Taoist priests teach that these energetic messages extend through infinite space to the Tao. As you see, whether it be Chi or Prana, the highest frequency, aka the most divine element of all, is thought. Apply thought to sound or any frequency and you can create. Creation, craftsmanship, artistry, innovations, and the passion for a new life or world is the product of crown chakra. Let's look at Big Mom. She is able to crush the will of others and even rob them of their souls. Just some typical soul manipulation, like I said Conqueror's Haki should be. However, if I'm correct about her powers being similar to that which you'd expect from Conqueror's Haki being taken to the next level and mastered, then that would be great news for me. Because if you aren't aware, I have a cursed sword theory in which I talk about how I believe cursed blades aren't actually cursed, but rather given a consciousness by Haki. I believe it is filled with an intangible spirit, you know, like Conqueror's Haki. Something about giving an inanimate object a consciousness sounds familiar. Isn't that exactly what Big Mom does to make her very talkative and often singing homies? Now let's apply this knowledge to put together a little theory. Okay, so piggybacking off of my cursed blade theory, in which I imply that there's Haki imbued in the blade that comes from the blacksmith, which gives the sword its own presence. I will now propose that it is Haki imbued within the poneglyphs left by their original creators that leaves a voice for Roger to hear using the technique known as the voice of all things. And what do you know, cursed blades and poneglyphs are both made in Wano. If putting Haki into a poneglyph gives it a voice, then that falls in line with what seems to be the primary objective of many homies. When Mother Camel creates a homie, she said that she would give it a voice. In fact, in one of the secret endings, I compared my theory to that of the Klabartaman, a spirit inhabiting a ship, which I believe to be the result of Conqueror's Haki. And what do you know? Big Mom's ship has its own spirit. Big Mom's power perfectly encapsulates the crown chakra element, which is one of the biggest reasons why I believe the power of thought is Conqueror's true power. So, in this video, the main point I'm making is that cursed swords are made from the Haki of the swordsmith. Now, the question is, are the swordsmiths putting Haki in on purpose? The reason I even question if it's on purpose is because it could be subconsciously. We've seen in the series that Haki can be used subconsciously. We've seen it with Luffy. He was using Haki before he even knew what it was. And we've seen it potentially with Zoro. You know, the breath of all things that Zoro uses is. So, one of the inspirations for me even having that type of thought process is another manga called Hunter x Hunter, in which they have this ability called Nen, very similar to Haki. It's like Haki, but way better because it has much more applications. And one of the things you learn very early on is that many people in the world use Nen subconsciously. They don't even know what Nen is, but they use it in their techniques, in their crafts.
This thing is... Look at that. You found a Ben's knife, huh? I didn't have any idea what it was. Huh? It just caught my attention is all. And that's when I noticed a faint aura. Wow, you weren't kidding. He said some really talented people can use Nen without even knowing.
So maybe the swordsmith are so ambitious, they have so much willpower that they're putting their spirit into the blades, regardless if they know they're doing it or not. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. I'd like people to know that that was a part of what helped me make this theory. In part 1, I came to the conclusion that cursed swords were the result of Haki infused in the blades by the swordsmith. Not Haki that made the sword itself stronger like black blades, but rather an invisible Haki that gives the blade a will of its own. Almost as if it was possessed or cursed. In this video, I'll go over what benefit that curse actually gives the blade rather than it being a detriment. I believe the potential in the cursed blade is not in its own power, but rather the power it draws out of the wielder. We already seen this with Zoro and Enma, Enma forced Haki out of him. Once he masters Enma, the compatibility between the sword and its master will probably allow Zoro to surpass his own limits. However, I don't think that's the extent of a cursed blade's true power. It's when you pair two curses together that you really see why the risk is worth it. I'm referring to devil fruits. Cursed blades usually have a demonic or hellish name, and devil fruits reference the demon king of hell himself. The curse of the devil fruit is described as a spirit, similar to how the curse of blades are said to have a will of their own. What I'm suggesting is that cursed blades will not only draw out the Haki of the swordsman, but the devil fruit powers as well. Remember, the curse of the blade is likely Haki to begin with, and we've seen that Haki and devil fruit powers can mix. Gear 4th is a great example of this. An even more significant piece of evidence is the fact that Sea Stone prevents both devil fruit and Haki abilities. I don't think it's a stretch to think that the two are connected and possibly synonymous. In fact, I don't think my proposition is just hypothetical. We may have already seen this a number of times in the story. The likes of Fujitora and Hawkins using their devil fruit powers through their swords comes to mind. Unfortunately, we don't know if their swords are cursed or not. However, Law is a swordsman that seems to almost exclusively use his sword alongside his devil fruit powers. And we know his sword, Kikoku, is indeed a cursed blade. With all that being said, stay tuned for the third installment, in which I show how I believe Zoro will obtain devil fruit powers. Now I'll just go over the devil fruit user's swords. So you have Law, who is pretty much always seen using Kikoku with his devil fruit power. It's almost as if he got the sword to be specifically used alongside his devil fruit powers. Almost as if he has somewhat of a dependency on the sword. Also, you gotta wonder, why is it even a cursed blade to begin with? Like, Oda had to make the conscious decision to say that Law's sword is a cursed sword. But for what reason? What purpose does it serve? Well, that's what this theory is for, is to say, well, there is a reason that it's significant that it's a cursed sword. And it has to do with using the devil fruit powers. Next, we're moving on to Hawkins. The way he uses his devil fruit powers on his sword is similar to that of Awakening. Now, we're not sure if he actually has awakened his devil fruit or not. However, if he hasn't and he's still able to use his sword the way that he does, it would make sense. It's like I said with Zoro and Enma. Them working together can make Zoro surpass his limits, so it could be possible that Hawkins using that sword allows him to use it as if he already is awakened, even if he isn't. Also, Hawkins uses voodoo. It wouldn't be too much of a surprise if he had a cursed sword when his power focuses around voodoo, which is all about curses. Now let's move on to Fujitora. He's always using his sword and his devil fruit power together. For some reason, when his devil fruit power has nothing to do with swords. When he's setting down meteors and the like, what does his sword have to do with that? Yet somehow, some way, his swordsmanship is causing his gravity powers to work. Well, what if it's the fact that the sword is enhancing his powers, and that's why he's so dependent on using the sword? In some way, this sword allows him to exceed his limits of what he could normally do with his gravitational powers. Now here's the real kicker. Fujitora might not even have a cursed blade, and this theory would still make sense, but we're not going to find out why until the next episode, so stay tuned. Real quick, the same thing I just said about Fujitora, I could say about Whitebeard, so I'm not even going to mention him, just imagine I switched the two. It makes sense. Lastly, I'm going to talk about Brook. He is so interesting that it's going to be its own video, so we're not actually going to talk about Brook, but stay tuned for that. And I guess that kind of makes it a 4-part theory, but I don't want to look at it like that. Brook is just going to get his own video. We'll leave it at that. Back then I said Brook would get his own video, however, instead he got a big part in my Understanding Hockey series. He is the thumbnail of part 3 for good reason, and still has more to explore in part 4. Once again, I cut down to just what is relevant. There's actually another reason that is just as important as to why I cut down the videos. That reason being, it is a highly detailed theory that has to be followed along to understand. If I show you things out of context without showing you the concepts I went over prior, then it wouldn't make much sense. Once you do get it, however, it shows One Piece in a whole new light. Music and spirituality are joined at the hip. So now let's look at themes in the story that Oda is trying to convey. There is no better arc to look at than the ones where the Soul King and Queen got to show off their powers. I believe that Brook and Big Mom's power are essentially Conqueror's Haki being used with extra effects. In fact, given that Haki is all about the spirit, it should be no surprise that the Soul Devil Fruit could possibly have that side effect. Just look at her life or death move. It's practically a more advanced and elaborate version of standard Conquerors. It's an intimidation move that can be used to spiritually damage a person. So much so that it can even cause death. And also, just like Conquerors, it can have no effect on a person if they have a strong enough will to not be intimidated. One might chalk it up to Lin herself being the one that has Conqueror's Haki, and she could be just combining it with her Devil Fruit. However, I can see many of you calling outright BS on Brook having Conqueror's Haki. I know it may seem outlandish, but I have plenty of evidence. First, remember Throat Chakra's element is sound, by extension, soul, and Haki. Everyone has a voice inside of them. All it would take is a way for someone to be granted the ability to manipulate and exert that voice, aka soul. Perhaps that could be done with the help of a Devil Fruit centered around that very power. And let's not forget his epithet, Soul King. Then consider that Conqueror's Haki is basically kingly spirit. I mean, come on, Haoshoku no Haki and Soru Kingu are practically synonymous. Now, I wouldn't be as ridiculous as to bring this up just off names alone. As I said, Conqueror's Haki is a spiritual attack. It is intangible, can be described as a sound or scream. Also, it can be used to break the will of weaker souls. If that doesn't accurately describe Brook's ability, then I don't know what does.
Baby.取ってつけたようなソウルが私の執念のティアマセイの叫びの前に立ってられるはずないんだぜ、baby.
With all that being said, what is the big deal about Conqueror's Haki? I guess it's cool that it can cause frequencies powerful enough to hurt the soul and possibly even do some damage to physical environment. But, I mean, is that really all that cool compared to being able to create fire or see into the future? Even hardening and basic observation is just as useful, if not more useful, most of the time. There has to be more to Conquerors for it to be such a feared power. I believe the answer lies once again with the Soul King. You see, Brook doesn't just scream to use the element of sound, he also sings and plays instruments to create music. Yep, even his music is Conqueror's Haki. I believe music to be a more refined spiritual power than just yelling. Brook has been able to use his music not just to knock out his opponents, but actually put them to sleep. He can fine-tune the frequencies he exerts in his spiritual attack. It's his other musical attacks that I believe will show us what the true potential of Conqueror's Haki is. So we know he can use his powers to dull his enemies, which is similar to Conqueror's, but he can also use it to pump up his allies. The truth of Conqueror's Haki is that it can alter the frequency of others. It's been used thus far to crush wills, but maybe it could be used to raise the frequency of others as well. Perhaps we've been seeing that power being used this whole time and not realizing it. Think about this, is a king's only duty to belittle others and make them feel insignificant? If he's a good king, he's going to want to encourage those under him to be their best selves. Is it possible that Luffy has been using this power to inspire those around him? This may be the power Mihawk referred to. And part 1 we learned that cursed blades aren't really cursed, but imbued with haki, aka spirit. In part 2 we learned that the spirit possessing the sword draws out the spirit of the swordsman. As a result, devil fruit users could use their power incorporated and enhanced by their swords. Now we're going to learn how our main swordsman Zoro will earn devil fruit powers. I personally have never wanted Zoro to get devil fruit powers of his own, and still don't. To clarify, I'm referring to him eating the devil fruit and having his soul merge with the cursed fruit. However, gaining a devil fruit sword, on the other hand, is exactly what I'd like to see. A devil fruit sword isn't anything new, nor does it have to be wielded by a master swordsman. Even someone as lame as Spandam can have one. However, Spandam wasn't even really using the weapon because the weapon itself was given life by a zoned devil fruit. It is widely believed that zoned devil fruits can be utilized by inanimate objects because it will give the lifeless object a consciousness. Without a will of its own, an inanimate object can't activate the devil fruit power in order to use paramecia or logia abilities. Or maybe the powers are active but can't be directed for specific use in accordance to the will of the weapon user. But I don't like the idea of Zoro having to settle for a zoned sword. I'll elaborate why in the secret ending, so let's move on to how it is that a paramecia or logia sword could be used. One method I could think of is cursed blade. They have a spirit of their own already in them despite being an inanimate object. Thus, if they get a devil fruit that was a paramecia, then the power could still be activated. Now the question of how could a power be tamed and utilized needs answers. To start off, it shouldn't be a surprise that it requires a master swordsman to use the devil fruit power within the sword. The will of the blacksmith needs to be satisfied before the swordsman can even think of using its power. The skill and conviction being proven to the blade's haki isn't all that is required because the swordsman needs to acknowledge that there is even a spirit in the blade, and then be able to listen, command, and exert the blade's power. This is where the swordsman mastering haki comes into play. High-level observation is required in order to acknowledge the spirit and listen to it. High-level armament haki, also known as Ryo, is necessary to release the power of the devil fruit sword. This is something I'm sure Zoro can accomplish because he knows the breadth of all things. The way Hyogoro described Ryo is identical to what Kiyoshiro said in the flashback in which the breadth of all things was introduced. It makes sense that Ryo, which is the ability to flow and release, will be used to unleash the devil fruit's power within the blade. To make it even more evident is the whole reason it is called the breadth of all things in the first place. Zoro was able to dodge rocks he couldn't even see. Clearly that falls in the line of observation haki. However, when observation haki is used, it's meant to sense and predict in response to the intent of other living beings. So how was it that Zoro was able to sense rocks that don't have wills of their own? It's because he can sense the breathing of the rocks. He could sense the breathing of everything around him, whether it was alive or not. Hence why it is called the breathing of all things. I believe that Zoro learning to understand the consciousness of a cursed sword will lead him to comprehend the consciousness of any sword. If he were to master the breath of all things, I'm sure he'd be able to use any devil fruit power of a sword, even if it wasn't cursed, like the Wado Ichimonji. With all that being said, it presents the obvious question. How would Zoro even get his hands on a devil fruit sword, or have a devil fruit put into the swords he already have? It sure be convenient if Vegapunk just decided to do that for Zoro, but we have no reason to believe that such a thing would happen at this moment. It's possible, but let's not put all our eggs in one basket. What if there is someone else besides Vegapunk, Caesar, or any other scientist that has nothing to do with Zoro? Side note, it would be hilarious if the Germa 66 gave Zoro a special sword just to piss off Sanji. Alright, back on topic. There may have been someone else more relevant to Zoro that could grant him a devil fruit sword. Maybe Zoro already has a devil fruit sword. The reason I say this is because that someone in Wano knows how to give inanimate objects a devil fruit. Remember, Hitetsu, the blacksmith that has been impressed with Zoro's swordsmanship, just happens to have a teapot named Bunbuku. He or someone he knows gave an inanimate object the Inu Inu no Mi model Tanuki. Perhaps there is a devil already within the Kitetsu that Zoro wields. Call me crazy, but it's almost too convenient to be irrelevant. Wano is clearly a place for Zoro to develop. Is it just a coincidence that we're learning more about cursed swords, Zoro's backstory, Rio, Breath of all things, and that someone on the island might be able to give devil fruits to Sword? Maybe it means nothing, but if it ends up coming true, well, you know it wasn't just an asshole. These videos show the evidence that has been there all along. And with that, concludes my cursed blade theory. What do you think? Would you love to see Zoro get his own Zanpakuto one day? Thanks for watching. That's it for Food for Thought. I made it short and sweet, but if you'd like to hear me elaborate more, then stick around for the secret ending. Would like Food for Thought? Then check out the rest of my channel. Want to see some actually well thought out analyses and theories with a bunch of evidence to back them up? Well, then check out my series Deep Dive. Thanks for watching. In this secret ending, I'm going over how Conqueror's Haki may have a bigger role in this theory. Next, I'll go over the other time that the story showed an inanimate object being possessed by a spirit. Lastly, I'll brainstorm over what devil fruit swords would be like based off the devil fruits we already know of in the story. Bonus, I'll actually create one of my own. Before we get into that, I'd love to show a portion of Case Doflamingo's intro. Don Quixote Doflamingo, an antagonist introduced in chapter 283, finally defeated well over 500 chapters later, and even in the present story, still has lingering effects that persist to be major issues. With that much time and planning dedicated to one character, I believe there's a lot more to be seen of Mr. Don Quixote beyond the surface level. In this case, we're going to be taking a deep dive into Doflamingo, the Don Quixotes, and One Piece at large. One thing I wanted to talk about in the main theory, but would have required me to go off on a tangent, is the possibility of a swordsman needing Conqueror's Haki. What I'm referring to is that in order for a swordsman to actually use the powers of the Logia or Paramusa devil fruit within the sword, they'd first need Conqueror's Haki. I know that may seem like a bit much, but think about how overpowered it is to just be able to wield a devil fruit without dealing with the risk. First off, the person would still be able to swim despite having access to devil fruit powers. That may not always be the case because the devil fruit object wielder may also have a devil fruit within their own body. But that leads me to the next overpowered aspect, the ability to stack devil fruit powers. If you already have a devil fruit, and you're using a devil fruit sword, then you'd have 2 devil fruit powers. And if you're someone like Zoro, then you have the potential to wield 3 devil fruit powers, or even 4. Hold on a minute, is that possibly how Blackbeard? Nah, I'm not even gonna go there. Last thing about spirit inhabiting an inanimate object. We have seen this displayed in the story at a crucial and super memorable moment that is not secret, it's very apparent. While it is just my theory that a sword can be possessed by a spirit, there's no room left for speculation when it comes to ships. In the same way I believe we're going to learn the truth about spirited swords from a blacksmith, we learn from a shipwright that ships can also have a will of their own. Frankie confirms that the Going Merry and ships before her have had their own souls. It has been documented and is known as the Klabaterman, however you pronounce that. It reminds me of the Cursed Blades and the Black Blades. Cursed Blades because it involves a spirit obviously, but also because the spirit is brought about by the ships being maintained and cared for, loved deeply, which reminds me of what a blacksmith would do for their weapon. It's like the Black Blades because the spirit is brought about gradually over time. While my theory might seem a little far-fetched, there is much precedent in the story to show how it is possible. Now it's time to have some fun with the ideas of what devil fruit weapons could be like. We're starting with Zone because they already exist in the story, so we have a better point of reference. Now before I actually get into it, I want to go over why I don't want to see Zoro get a Zone sword. Well, that's not entirely true. I'd be fine with seeing him get one, but I prefer it to be his last one. There are 3 types of devil fruits, and he does have 3 swords after all. Why I'm least excited to see him get a Zone sword is because it wouldn't suit his fighting style as well, and wouldn't display his personal skill as much. He's strong enough by himself, he doesn't really need help from an animal. But now that I think about it, he could get a mythical zone sword, which would add special powers to his blade. And it wouldn't be so bad for him to have an ally while he's using two sword style. In fact, that kinda sounds awesome. Didn't give zone swords enough credit at first. Okay, so a zone weapon, as we already seen, can operate all on their own. Meaning, the user doesn't have to be a very skilled fighter. They just need to be the very best, like no one ever was. What would a zone devil fruit do for a skilled warrior such as Zoro? If Zoro had a zone devil fruit and incorporated into Santorio, give him a variety of possible benefits depending on the animal, such as a sword being able to be tougher, swifter, extended reach, possibly even granting the sword flight. The haki between sword and master would probably be connected, so whatever heightened senses of the animal that the sword gains, the master probably will as well. An elephant could gain more reach, a bull could add more thrusting strength, a wolf could heighten the senses and killer instinct. A spider zone could possibly produce webs, turn into 8 blades, and be venomous. So many possibilities. Even more wonderful with the mythical zone. Okay, so let me just go across the mythical zone. We have Marco. The phoenix devil fruit produces flames. It's a bird, so it can fly, and it has regenerative properties. So it's a sword that would probably be able to heal its user, could set things on fire, and itself could probably fly around the place. I mean, that just sounds awesome off the bat. Then you have Sengoku, who Buddha. When you look into haki, it's all about the spirit. So I can imagine the Buddha devil fruit probably makes haki stronger, which would be great for a swordsman. And probably wouldn't be too bad to have the Buddha as a partner that fights alongside you. Kaido, dragon. A dragon sword would have super long reach. Dragon's breath, dragon's fire. One thing that'd be cool, if you remember Momo, he was able to create clouds that he can step on. So I can imagine a sword user, that'd be really cool to have. Just a whole bunch of stepping platforms that are cloud. You have the nine-tailed fruit. I think that would be amazing. You'd have probably some kind of whip or something function on the hilt of the sword that could be used for grabbing. That would be the tails of the sword. And the sword itself, well, what does the devil fruit of the nine tails do? Well, it could transform into different people. So I could imagine a sword that was the nine tails could transform into different weapons. So probably wouldn't be as powerful as the previous three that I just said, but has a crazy amount of versatility. And then you have the Yamato no Orochi. I think this one's pretty easy to think. One, it would have reach, really long reach. It'd be fast and nimble like a snake, and it'd be an 8-headed blade, so it'd probably be a sword that can split into 8 different blades. I mean, that'd be really cool. But yeah, that about covers it for the zones that I really wanted to talk about. Let's move on to Paramecia. It's hard to pinpoint what a Paramecia sword would be like because a Paramecia could pretty much be anything. So I'll limit myself to focusing on just 5 Paramecias first, and then I can talk about others later. I'm starting off with the Super no Mi. This was the first one that came to mind. Initially I thought it'd be pretty useless because what are you gonna do, turn a sword into more steel? But that's not all that the Super no Mi does. It's not that it would be able to change the material of the blade, which would be redundant, but also that it could change the shape. The Super sword would probably be able to grow and branch out other types of weapons. Secondly, the Bara no Mi of Buggy the Clown. The fruit immune to cutting, paired up with being a sword itself, would end up being a double-edged sword. Of course, I don't mean that literally. Maybe that wasn't the best figure of speech, but my point is, it would be sacrificing defense for more offense. Whenever you use it against other cutting weapons, the Bara sword wouldn't be able to defend against another sword, because obviously any other sword would go right past the Bara no Mi sword. But this also means that the Bara no Mi sword can go past any defense of any other sword, so it's just a whole bunch of offense and barely any defense. What would be really cool about the Bara no Mi sword would be the fact that it can separate into many pieces and fly around. For those who know of Bleach, there's a character named Byakuya. Think about the Zenbone Sakura. A sword blade scattering and following its opponent is so powerful and threatening. The Hana no Mi of Robin. Like I said with the Super no Mi, the Hana Hana no Mi could also branch out the blade and extend itself. However, it'd be much more powerful in this scenario, because not only would the blade shapeshift, it could also sprout off and spawn in far distances, this making the blade both a close range and long range ability. Then add the fact that full body clones are possible to make, thus 2 sword style and higher is now accessible. Finally, Robin has the ability to make giant arms, so the sword would have the ability to make giant blade. How I'd imagine a sword master wielding a Hana Hana sword would use it is in 2 phases. A sheathed form, as implied the sword is still in its scabbard, however the blade can sprout out of the sword master's body. That's when all of its abilities are released. I think it'd be cool if the unsheathed version is mistaken for a sword master having the Super no Mi or other similar fruits. The 4th one I want to talk about is the Kage no Mi. To start off, it can cut shadows, which at daytime would disintegrate the opponent and at nighttime would at least knock them out. Then the sword itself can have its own shadow clone, which would allow for 2 sword style. Even in 1 sword style, manipulation of the shadow would manipulate the physical shape of the sword, so once again allows for shape-shifting swords. It can absorb shadows. It could also gain strength by absorbing other shadows. Talk about a whole new way to forge a black sword. And I'm sure because the sword master is holding the Kage no Mi sword, their own shadow will be manipulated as well. Have you seen Soul Eater? In it, a character named Blackstar has a partner that it also happens to be his sword. The sword can manipulate his shadow. Not going off topic, but shout out to Shadowstar. The 5th one I'll make up myself. I'll call it the Kage no Mi. Wait, didn't we just do that? Oh, okay, it's called the Koge no Mi. And them sounding similar is just a coincidence. It means scorch fruit. Now, you might be thinking One Piece already has enough fire-like devil fruits, but I promise this one's different. Since I'm making up a fruit, I might as well make up a swordsmaster. Her name will be Hotspur, and she's a knight of whatever the British Kingdom is called in One Piece. She's in full body armor, so is often mistaken for the man, and that's enough for her backstory. The scorch fruit is similar to the character from My Hero Academia named Tenya, and his quirk is known as Engine. Engine grants Tenya engine-like protrusions somewhere on his body to allow him to move at extraordinary speeds. In Tenya's case, the engine-like protrusions appear in a specific location. However, this devil fruit can create mufflers anywhere on the body, or in this case, the sword. The devil fruit is pretty straightforward. It allows speed and flight. It's one of those devil fruits that are C tier because it only does one thing, but is really good at what it does. An example of this is Bellamy's spring devil fruit. It's not as versatile as the Gomu no Mi, which is also springy, but it's at least the best at being the spring. An even better example of this is Leo's stitch fruit. Clearly Doflamingo's string devil fruit is better overall, but not only is Leo's devil fruit better at stitching, it's one that is suited for Leo given his size and speed. This is a devil fruit great for a sword. The engine-powered slices and thrusts will have much more force behind them, and the mufflers can point in any direction, allowing for immediate change in direction of any swing of the blade. The mufflers can be small or large. In battle, the sword usually uses a bunch of minuscule jets on the blade, which makes it appear as if the sword itself is on fire. The sword can be thrown at great velocities and accelerate even after leaving Hotspur's hand. Since the sword has a will of its own, it can fly and become a missile. That covers most of what it does unsheathed. When it is sheathed, it's strapped to the back of the knight, and in that state, the sword becomes a jetpack. Hotspur already uses jets in her armor. The jetpack just allows her to fly at its supersonic speed. Alright, let's have a lightning round and just go down the list of Paramute shields. So we have the Gomu no Mi. Obviously that would make the fruit have extra reach, but rubber's kinda soft, so it wouldn't be that great for a sword. Maybe a hammer, or just a staff. We have the Barami, already went over that. Slip fruit. I don't see how that really help a weapon be all that offensive. I don't even think a bomb fruit. I mean, I think that's pretty self-explanatory of what it would do for a weapon. Just make things explode. Pretty simple. Kilo no Mi, again, very simple. It will just make your weapon heavier or lighter. That would be powerful, but it's kind of a boring one. Very well, that. The wax fruit. I mean, would this do that much for weapons? I don't think it'd be all that great for a weapon to have the wax fruit. Don't get me wrong, it's powerful in the hands of a human, but a weapon doesn't add that much to it. The munch fruit. Okay, now this would actually be kind of cool. You could eat things with your weapon, and then it would empower the weapon. So the weapon will get more powerful based off what it eats. The question is, how do you make a weapon eat? Well, yeah, I'm pretty sure the munch fruit would probably give a weapon teeth. We have the spike fruit. I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. It just grows spikes on the weapon. You just make a weapon more spikier. Cage fruit, you can use a weapon to shackle people. Spring fruit, that would be cool. Just make a sword be really coiled and then you just let it release, and then it could probably turn a simple sword into like a sniper with that. Rust sword, that would definitely be powerful. Pretty boring because it's self-explanatory, just rust things, but it would definitely be powerful if a sword had the rust fruit. Wheel fruit, I don't even remember that one. But put a wheel on some sword or some kind of weapon, I guess. You could turn like a cannon into a tank. The revive fruit, that doesn't make sense to give a weapon because it doesn't have life to begin with. But maybe it gives it life, I don't know. Paw fruit allows you to. Yeah, that'd be weapon. I mean, that'd be effective. To give like a shield, the paw fruit, it'd be invincible. Or even like a hammer or something blunt object. Castle fruit, you could have a weapon that has a bunch of weapons already in that one weapon. You could put people in your weapon. Yeah, that'd be pretty insane. You could take shelter inside of your own weapon. Okay, the straw fruit, we kind of already seen what that would be like. The love fruit, I mean, how do you'd have to have a weapon so beautiful? I don't know, that seems weird. Poison fruit, yeah, that'd be cool. Super powerful, pretty self-explanatory. The snip fruit, I mean, that's like beyond explanatory what that would do. Making diamond weapons would be cool. The arms fruit would obviously be awesome. You could have any weapon you want, really. Spin fruit, yeah, you can make drills. Pop fruit, you can make things explode. The mirror fruit would actually be kind of cool, because you could have a reflective surface in your sword and use that as a weapon and stuff. Alright, this is getting boring. Moving on. Now onto Logias. How I imagine this works is that the sword can become intangible and shapeshift, just like a normal Logia user. This allows the sword to be concealed in super secretive ways. Let's say someone has a Meter no Mi sword. I could just imagine a ball of fire being kept, and when the sword is activated, it turns into a normal blade. Or maybe the fire floats around him, kind of like King. Logi's swords are pretty straightforward. A fire sword, a light sword, an ice sword, all those many swords. In fact, many Logia users just create swords with their powers already. Like half of these people here already do that. A smoke sword, I mean, I guess the only cool thing about that is you can make a smoke screen. Not much to do, but whatever. Crocodile sand sword actually would be really cool because the sword could like turn into minuscule pieces. That brings me back to what I was talking about with Byakuya from Bleach. So, and you could also dehydrate people, so a sand sword would actually be really cool. Fire sword, yeah, kind of boring in my opinion, but you know, be super powerful. Lightning sword obviously would be super cool. Ice sword would be powerful. A dark sword, huh? That'd be interesting. Dark sword, I'm not really sure how that would work, and I don't feel like brainstorming that. Light sword seems pretty explanatory. It'd be like lasers and shooting beams. Lava sword will obviously be super destructive. A lava hammer would probably be cooler than a lava sword. Mud sword, the only cool thing about that would be being able to suck people into the sword. I don't know, you could probably find a better object than a sword if you're going to use this devil fruit. Air sword, the cool thing about that is you could probably set it on fire, kind of like what Caesar already does to make his own sword. And you could probably incorporate some kind of wind slash. An ice sword doesn't seem all that lethal or threatening. And then, yeah, fire sword, whatever. But yeah, please let me know what you think, all the creative ideas you could come up with these devil fruit swords. I'd love to hear it. Thank you so much if anyone's made it this far. It was a great ride. And I still have one more video to make about Brook. And of course, catch Case do Flamingo. That's going to be a really good video.